top news starts with the Cold War finally coming to an end. It is 1991 and our indirect war with the Soviet Union has come to a close.
What was the Cold War about anyway? I mean, was it really a war?
Technically, the Cold War was a conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. Although there was no direct fighting between the Soviet Union and the United States, the Cold War dominated international affairs from 1945 to 1991 and created other issues around the world.
Didn't it include conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, and Europe as a whole?
The root of the issue between the U.S. and the Soviet Union was the dramatic differences in political opinions. The Cold War created a separation of countries, divided into First, Second, and Third Worlds. First World was the United States and other democratic nations. The Second World was the Soviet Union and other communist nations. Finally, the Third Worlds were the semi-independent or underdeveloped countries. The First World United States and the Second World Soviet Union were involved in an aggressive competition that led to the space race, a significant dangerous arms race, and other events.
The democratic United States saw the communist Soviet Union as their worst enemy, and vice versa. As the United States fought to contain communism, the Soviet Union pressed to spread communism. These countries fought each other by supporting enemies of the other side.
There are many different aspects of the conflict of the Cold War. The Cold War was a political, military, and media conflict. It led to heightened anxieties from people all over the world and created many problems simply from the hatred between the Soviet Union and the United States.
Well, who was involved within the conflicts? Who were the leaders?
Two important presidents of the United States during the Cold War were Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy. Reagan created a doctrine that involved military movements that were having problems overthrowing the Soviet-sponsored tyrannies. The doctrine reached to Afghanistan, Cambodia, Angola, and Nicaragua. He also initiated a Strategic Defense Initiative, or more popularly known as Star Wars.
It's important to remember the leaders of the countries and that the governments were very influential.
What part of the government was the most influential, though?
Well, the Department of State reached its full power when the Cold War began. The three Secretaries of State, George Marshall, Dean Akin, and John Foster, were the people that influenced some U.S. policies.
The Cold War caused major changes to the U.S. foreign policy.
Yes, and that's when McCarthyism had affected the department, so it's not surprising that the policy of containment would develop to a political and military dimension.
Containment was a United States policy that used numerous strategies to prevent the spread of communism abroad. This policy, which was a key component of the Cold War, was in response to several attempts by the Soviet Union to spread communism. They attempted to spread their ideas and influence in Eastern Europe, China, Korea, Africa, and Vietnam. They represented a middle ground position between detente and rollback. This is the strategy of forcing changes in major policies that is meant to prevent the expansion of communism.
The Sputnik launch changed the world as we knew it. As a technical achievement, Sputnik caught the world's attention and the American public off guard. Its size was more impressive than the U.S. Vanguard's intended 3.5-pound payload. In addition, the public feared that the Soviets' ability to launch satellites also translated into the capability to launch ballistic missiles that could carry nuclear weapons from Europe to the U.S. Then the Soviets struck again. On November 3rd, Sputnik 2 was launched, carrying a much heavier payload.
Yes, and a lasting expression of Sputnik to the U.S. was that Sputnik launch also led directly to the creation of National Aeronautics and the Space Administration. In July 1958, Congress passed the National Aeronautics and Space Act, which created NASA as of October 1st, 1958. From the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics and other government agencies.
Most people have the assumption that the space race was just a competition to secure bragging rights. However, the space race has a lasting impact on the entire world. The capabilities obtained via the launching of rockets into space significantly raised the concerns of peoples all over the world.
Now we will have a short break. Next up, influential leaders from the Cold War.
Here we have Ronald Reagan to talk about his presidency.
Thank you. I am Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States. I was president during the Cold War. I proposed a doctrine, the Reagan Doctrine, which involved military and material support for indigenous rebel movements fighting to overthrow Soviet-sponsored attacks. My administration supported such assistance in Afghanistan, Cambodia, Angola, and Nicaragua. In March 1983, I initiated SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, or better known as Star Wars. This was a wide-scale research and development effort attempting to build an anti-missile defense shield. This should have protected us from Soviet nuclear threat. I believed in peace through strength. I increased defense spending by 35%, but wanted to improve relations with the Soviet Union. I negotiated with Mikhail Gorbachev to eliminate medium-range nuclear missiles.
Now we will have another influential president. We are going to interview John F. Kennedy. He's going to explain his theories, principles, and events that occurred during his presidency.
Thank you so very much for your time. It was my own defense secretary, Robert McNamara, who developed the theory of mutually assured destruction. This was dependent on the production of a sizable nuclear arsenal. I firmly believed in the domino theory, and during my presidency, the United States came close to the brink of nuclear war. This event marred the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred when American pilots photographed evidence of Soviet ballistic missiles being installed on the island of Cuba, despite Khrushchev's personal assurances that there was no plan to arm Cuba with nuclear weapons. I recruited present and former cabinet members and former members of Congress to form the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or XCOM. The XCOM had found no proof that there were nuclear warheads on the island, although declassified Soviet documents account for 134 warheads located on Cuba at that time. It was also during my presidency in which the Bay of Pigs occurred. In 1959, Fidel Castro came into power by overthrowing the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. The United States did not trust Castro and was very wary of his relationships with Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union. Shortly after my inauguration, I authorized the invasion plan. We disguised United States support, and the landing point at the Bay of Pigs was part of the deception. Unfortunately, the landing site left the invading force more than 80 miles from the refuge in the Escambray Mountains. The disaster that occurred in the Bay of Pigs had a lasting impact on my administration.
Now we finally have the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to talk to us about his side of the story.
Hello, I began leader of the Soviet Union from 1955 until 1964. I was a leader during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In relation with the West, the period I was in office was marked by a series of crises. The shooting down of American U.S. spy planes over the Soviet Union in 1960, the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961, and most significantly, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Despite this, I am also tempted to pursue a policy of coexistence with the West. This change in doctrine, together with the rejection of Stalinism, led to a split with communists in China in 1960.
Well, that wraps up our Cold War series. See you again soon.
Scoot back in the chair.
This is how I sit for band. This is how I sit all the time because of stupid band.
Scoot back. There you
Look
go.
at my feet.
Well, that's because you're short.
Oh yeah, they do. Doctrine that involves military and material support for indigenous...
Just keep going.
Oh!
We'll cut it
We're
out.
starting over? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, just stop
Okay,
it.
it says record.
What?
It says it's going.
Oh.
Fine.
Okay, start over.
Oh, crap.
Sponsored a resolution in the Senate.
I'm tapped. Oh my gosh. What does this mean? I'm so bad at grammar. Stop.
Shut up.